Hello everybody, and welcome to another Guild Wars 2 video. As you all know, there's not been any big patches for the game for a while, so like news could, in theory, have slowed down. However, I wanted to do a news video, keep you guys up with a lot of stuff that's happening in the community and in-game also, because things have been changing over this Christmas period, and even though we haven't had a big formal patch with a bunch of new Living World stuff, there have been changes in-game. Some of you might not know, ArenaNet have got like two different ways that they can push updates or change the state of the game. One of them is through big patches that you have to relog for, but another one's like this really subtle thing that you don't have to relog for, as far as I'm aware, and they can just sort of push a sneaky little update through into the game, and they've been doing that quite a lot between Living World releases, just to tease at tiny new things that might have changed. And you know, if like the world is about to end and everything breaks, I believe they can also like hotfix using that system too. But it does mean that again, over this winter period, because it's been a little while since we've had the big patch that introduced the destruction of the tower and so forth, there have been some changes going on. Namely, a bunch of characters have appeared in the Dead End Bar. This could be old news to some, but since I haven't mentioned it on the channel, I want to say that. And then we'll go into some other stuff that's happening with the community. So, first of all, the thing with the Dead End Bar. If you guys are new to the Living Story, or you just forgot about it because we were only required to go there maybe once or twice, ArenaNet actually added a new, like, tavern location in Divinity's Reach. It serves as its own little instance, and it seems to be, I don't know whether it's officially meant to be, but it seems to be sort of the place that Marjorie Delacroix works out of. And I don't think originally that was meant to be the case. It was just sort of one of those locations she would go to find contacts or meet with people. But that was where we originally met Marjorie and Casimir, and where we originally enlisted to have their help during the Dragon Bash stuff. You could always return there between that patch and the most recent one, but very little changed, if ever, I believe, in there. However, now that the Nightmare Ends has been released and everything's sort of done, those characters have now moved from Keswick's Hills back to Divinity's Reach. I mean, their work's done, the tower's been destroyed, so where do they go? This is like, I guess, really what they're trying to aim for with the Living World, like the idea that these characters really are in real time moving around from place to place where they logically would be going. And I think if that was expanded to a broader scale, there were much more characters constantly moving positions like this, could be very interesting. And it's kind of a nice way of doing things, but also it's another thing that makes it incredibly complicated to let people play past Living World stuff. So, like, for the first time, if you look at the way these characters have moved from one place to the other, you can kind of see, like, if people ask, oh, hey, I want to be able to play the Nightmare Within stuff, the tower stuff, in 6 months' time, let me do that. And then it's down to ArenaNet to figure out, well, how do we logically do that then? Because we've got these characters that were only in Keswick's Hills during this brief period of time. Does it mean if you're playing through the Living World stuff, you're entirely, like, all of Keswick's Hills becomes an instance that is exactly as it was, you know, way back during Christmas? And then you're playing in Keswick's Hills, but you never get to see any other players the entire time you're doing the Living World unless you're with a party of 5 people? It seems kind of weird. But then again, the personal story was exactly like that too, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to replay that also. But you can see why it maybe gets a little bit more complicated. Anyway, these characters have gone to the Dead End Bar, and there's actually a fair bit of new dialogue, probably hinting at things to come. ArenaNet have been doing a really good job, I think, in advertising and building hype up for these final 4 releases that conclude the Scarlet story. We've got the break, they're going to do those, and then we're basically sort of starting a new chapter of the Living Story, so it would seem. There's like 3 idle dialogue conversations you can see characters in the bar having. Not only Marjorie's gone back to the bar, not only Casimir's gone back to the bar, but Bram and Rox are also there too, and all of these characters like will be interacting with one another. If you just stand there and listen to them, like much like any other NPC out in Guild Wars 2, eventually they're going to have a conversation. One of them is basically Casimir's up in arms about the fact that Scarlet's got away, and she feels like there's a great risk to the Queen, or that the Queen must be panicking, and she's annoyed and she wants to question people in Divinity's Reach. She says, oh, someone out in this city must know something, we just need to go ask. And a small part of me wonders whether that's ArenaNet being like, hey, when we move these characters to the Dead End Bar, we also changed a tiny bit of dialogue on one character in Divinity's Reach. Go play, go have a look, go see whether you can find it. I think that'd be awesome. I doubt that they did that, but that would be such a cool idea. You know, like, I was filming the footage for this video, which is what I'm talking about, so and walking around in all these cool little places in Divinity's Reach. I've got to say, Divinity's Reach is like the last place in Guild Wars 2 that really brings a strong sense of magic back to me. I remember my first time walking around Lion's Arch in the betas and seeing convention footage of various areas, and there was like a lot of magic there and like a thrill and excitement I want to go explore. That's basically gone for everywhere in Guild Wars 2 for me now, because I've played it all. But Divinity's Reach I don't know, there's something about that place, and I guess it's because players spend so little time there. There's so little reason to hang around Divinity's Reach. They've done like the odd thing during the Queen's Jubilee. There was that cool bit with the torches, but I feel like one of the biggest priorities for ArenaNet should be to look at the cities and encourage players to have constant, interactive things that they can do there. Real content, end game content, stuff that they can do for fun. There's not necessarily hardcore or whatever, but keeps people in the cities would be awesome. And that's just like never seems to have been on their mind. So anyway, I'm wandering around Divinity's Reach, and I'm like, I really want a reason to play here. And wouldn't that be a cool reason to get people to play? To like add a tiny bit of dialogue on one character, and we just sort of wander around and go on a big hunt for them, and then maybe we learn a little bit more about Scarlet. That'd be cool. Anyway, there's another conversation that goes on between Rox and Bram, and Marjorie sort of steps in as well at the same time because these characters are quite close to each other, which also is quite cool. The conversation basically talks about how Rox has to go and see Ritlock and report to him soon, and Bram's a bit cheesed off about it. And then I believe it's Marjorie, or it could be Lady Casimir, pops in and says, "Oh wow, you know Ritlock?" And then Rox just says, "Yeah, he's this fierce warrior, you don't even know," kind of thing. Which is cool. What I really liked about this little conversation was we got to see some characters talking to some other characters that we don't usually. Like Rox and Bram are always paired off, and it's just, cookie cutter, these two characters off on their adventure. And then the same for Marjorie and Lady Casimir, and there's been very little crossover. And I think some of the more interesting moments characters can have in stories and stuff is where they cross over like that. And it seems cool that at some level the devs were like, okay, all these characters are going to be next to each other, let's have some actual dialogue where they interact with one another. That's smart. The short-sighted thing to do would have been just have Rox and Bram talk to each other next to each other, and Casimir and Marjorie talk to each other next to one another, and leave it there. So I was happy to see that. The last conversation, which is perhaps the most interesting, is Marjorie mentions she's been contacted again to watch out, I think, or something along those lines, by E. So E is probably the best mystery they've set up in the Living Story. I think most people can probably agree. One of the best characters they've done in the Living Story, in my opinion, is Kanak, who's just sort of been shunted off to the side now. But E has been consistently a very, very cool character and idea that I'm still very much enjoying. E is a mystery man in the background who He's been tipping people off at certain times. He sent us a mail at Dragon's Bash warning us that something was going to happen. He seems to be this well-connected individual who is fighting for good somehow, but we have no idea who this person is. We once got a story about Marjorie Delacroix's backstory and why she became private investigator, and basically the reason is she was contacted by E, who mentioned to her that really big stuff was going on and that Divinity's Reach, I think it was, needed her help. Like a really cool character, and ArenaNet just throw this character in there every now and then. And this is another situation where he's mentioned to still be out there and still be doing stuff, and every in-game mention they do is far more valuable than an out-of-game mention they did, say, on a story blog post that barely anyone in the community actually reads. In addition to all of that as well, you can speak to the characters, like actually press F and have the little dialogue boxes. Again, they've done that well. It changes depending on the race that you are. So, for example, Lady Casimir doesn't really understand much about the Sylvari, and if you are a Sylvari, then the conversation will take a different turn to if you're, say, an Asura like I am, where you sort of just agree that they're these stupid plant children. There's some more significant stuff in those little conversations too. In that, again, we get a little bit more in-game backstory for Scarlet. Again, I think it's so much more worthwhile to put it in-game than the stories. Most of the backstory and information we have about Scarlet comes from a story that they posted on the website. That's not good enough. I mean, it's an amazing read, and I wish it was in-game somehow. It's a great read, and they've got a cool story, but nobody really knows or recognizes it. However, if you speak to these characters in Dead End Bar, at least there is a vague, cursory mention to some of the stuff that happened in that story. For example, that Scarlet's craziness started when she interacted with an Asura who put her in a machine. Like, it's Casimir's understanding of the situation, which she is vague about at best. But at least they're putting it there in-game. The other thing that could be quite striking and indicative of things to come is if you're speaking to Rox and Bram, there seems to be a bit of tension brewing there because Bram has been having a lot of fun with Rox, I guess, and Bram is a Norn. Norn are very individual, but Rox is like constantly saying, oh, I've got to go back, I've got to go see Ritlock, I've got to go report to him. And you can kind of, I don't know, the way they write it makes it seem like you can make her doubt herself a little bit when you're talking to her, but it seems like that's probably something that's coming up in the future. One thing I do want to mention there if you guys remember with the Gw2 update, they changed her name to be like Rock Stone Skin or something, Stone Pick, I think it was, but suggesting therefore that she'd actually got into Ritlock's warband, which is what she's been trying to do for a long time. However, that seems to have been a slip-up or something. That's no longer her name. That was like an early thing. It was not intended at all, and the situation is still that she's trying to get in the warband. So if you are still under the impression, like I was for a hell of a long time, that she was in the warband, she's actually not, and that was just some weird slip-up. So yeah, that's basically everything that's going on with the Living Story. I would expect I mean, the next big patch, the start of these next big 4 patches that they're really hyping people about, are going to be starting, I think, 2 weeks or so. So I'm not sure whether we'll have any more of these like sneaky updates that move characters around or whatever, but we will keep our eye out. There's something else going on in Kessex Hills too. They're a consortium asking the Quaggan about stuff that's been happening, so maybe we'll see some more consortium involvement soon. Looking back, I really enjoyed all the consortium stuff. I really did. It's kind of odd. But yeah, lots of displaced Quaggan, and then there's some stuff going on there too. Anyway, that's basically what's going on in game. I want to get on to like more community style news along the same thread of the devs hyping stuff up. They've done quite a few distinct things. Number one, I've mentioned a lot of this on the Visualwood podcast, by the way, guys. There's going to be a lot of links in the description for this video. Visualwood will probably be one of them when it goes live, so you can hear maybe some more extended thoughts and stuff like this between me and Matt. But basically, a metronome, like a real life, I believe on our website they mentioned that ArenaNet is venturing into the world of the meat. A real life metronome was shipped by mail to Gamerzines, I believe, and they obviously posted news about it and said, hey, look at what ArenaNet just sent us. It's a metronome. If you remember back during Queen's Jubilee, lots of sites and people were given clockwork watches with inscriptions on them. Again, this is kind of, I guess, fitting into the timing, clockworkish theme thing with a metronome. But again, it's got a poem on it, which is a pretty interesting read. Again, trying to hype people for the new release. I'll read it out to you guys. I think it's a pretty cool one. Thump, thump, time to jump. Wipe all resistance from your mind. There's a secret deep below to find. If you'd only seen the things I've seen, you'd wake up screaming from the dream. This next part will sting, but it brings me joy. Sometimes to change you must destroy. A fire is rising you cannot contain. Tyria will burn while I remain. Obviously, it sounds like it's coming from Scarlet Briar. There is no, like, tag on it that says, this is from Scarlet, but it sounds like it's from Scarlet. It's another one of those things, I guess that's trying to make it seem like she knows what she's doing, and everything, all this crappy stuff she's done has been for a good reason because of whatever she saw in the dream. But as I mentioned, a Visualwood, like, it's kind of interesting to think about that, but then at the same time, is it a bit too long that they've just been throwing this constant invisible reason for all of her misdoings at us? Like, can we get some actual reasoning behind it? And maybe that's what we'll be getting in the next 4 patches. We'll have to see. But that's one thing they did for hype. The other big thing, you guys might have noticed, I actually had someone leave a comment saying, hey, I was watching one of your Guild Wars 2 videos, Wooden Potatoes, and I got an advert at the start of it of Guild Wars 2, and indeed, yeah, ArenaNet have released a new trailer. You can see it on their YouTube page, or you can just see it if you get lucky on YouTube when they throw an advert at you, advertising the next few patches for the Living Story. I think ArenaNet have been really smart. They've identified one of the biggest things that is lacking right now from their Living World system, and that's that people don't want to come back into the game because they feel like they don't understand the story so far, and they addressed that bang on with this trailer, and the entire trailer's purpose is to teach people what has happened over the past year. They do it very well. They do it in a cinematic way, showing off all the best stuff from the patches that we've seen so far. They do it in a concise way. It's like a 2-minute trailer, something like that. And they sort of sweep through all of the story. So hopefully old Guild Wars 2 players can say, oh wow, all this stuff's been going on. I actually understand what's going on as well, at least to a slight degree, and then they come back in. You guys know I do Living Story recaps on this channel from time to time. My main problem is I can't cut details. I find it so hard. I just want to throw everything I possibly can, every detail, into those videos I do. So I can imagine how hard it was for ArenaNet to produce a trailer like that and have to cut out so much. But they did pretty well. It also came up with a blog post too, with a little bit more of an in-depth look. It's still very concise, but there is a little bit more information about what's happened with the Living World, and I think that's really important that they have those recaps. I think it's the kind of thing that should be on that screen when you're patching. It should be like patch notes, Living World recap, and a really easy to read, concise, well-written timeline that gets people enthused about the Living Story. So right there, as you're logging into Guild Wars 2, you've got this thing you can read so that you know what's happening. People get so worried about coming back into the game because they're like, oh, I don't really know what's going on in the story. And it doesn't matter anyway, because even people who do know the story don't care that much. They're only really there for the achievements and stuff. So like, it's a really weird, like, double standard thing. It stops people coming in, even though once they are in, they probably wouldn't care that much. That's my view of how it goes in the community anyway right now. So yeah, they're doing quite a lot to hype people up. Those are the two big ones. Right, some other small things. Number one, I'm going to brush over this because it's sort of flared up and died down. But there was a thing on Reddit the other day. There's a guy called That Shaman who used to be a really, really prevalent data miner. He did loads of data mining, talked about patches come up, but he did it in a pretty respectful way. He did it without spoiling future stuff for the story. Became a bit of a hero to many people over on that subreddit, I've got to say. So, he actually stopped playing the game to as great an extent as he used to, and so he stopped data mining a while back. But he did decide to post at least one thing for us quite recently that worried him greatly, and it was the idea of a VIP program for Guild Wars 2. The idea basically looked like, hey, you can now pay a subscription for Guild Wars 2 if you like. And this was real information, real art, real text that he pulled out of the client for Edge of the Mist. Something that looked like it was going to be very real for Guild Wars 2. And basically the idea is you pay a subscription as far as we could speculate, and you would get a bunch of benefits. There'll be an image on the screen right now if you guys want to see what those benefits are. They include gem store discounts, convenient banking, extra bank space, the ability to teleport to a friend, convenient trading, a resurrection buff, all sorts of stuff. And it got people very, very worried, and I've got to agree with them. I think this would be a terrible, terrible move. Guild Wars 2 has always shone as this great example of a AAA MMO that has stood very, very, very far away from subscriptions, and this is what people really liked about it. And even though this would be an optional thing for additional benefits that, let's be honest, are largely already available on the gem store, it still would leave a bit of a sour taste. There was also an idea that you could be a VIP to different levels and you'd get different star thresholds and you'd get like this tag next to your name. It seemed pretty ridiculous. However, the devs did turn around very quickly and just confirm that they test a bunch of stuff out that will never become a real thing. And I guess this falls into one of those categories. And this was primarily being looked at for something for the Chinese client. You guys might not know, but actually Chinese beta testing and stuff is going on right now. There's a lot going on to release the game in that region, and it's quite typical for MMOs to have some kind of subscriptions-based service. Like, things just work quite differently over there, and this could be something that would be quite necessary for Guild Wars 2. So that was kind of what they did. I find it curious if this was meant to be a Chinese thing, why do it with, like, English text and whatever, but people freaked out, and I'm sure if there was ever any doubt in ArenaNet's mind that their Western audience might buy it, was instantly quenched. I don't think they are that stupid that they thought that this would go well, but you know, there are some people a lot more cynical than me, and it kind of it was an interesting little topic for a little while, especially when there was no response from the devs and people were just like, wow, what the hell is this subscription fee for Guild Wars 2? I did have a conversation with Matt much longer than this over on the podcast, and he actually had some different thoughts about it, you know, that it is something quite optional and maybe it wouldn't have been so bad, and that we should worry ourselves more about the content for the game rather than services and stuff like that. But I'll leave that to you guys if you want to listen to that over there. I'll move on though, because we're already getting quite long in the episode. Another thing that came out, if you guys spent gems during December, if you spent a certain low threshold of gems, 400 or 800 I think, you'll get a mini green Quaggan backpack, which is pretty cool. If you spent 4,000 gems, if you bought 4,000 gems rather, you could get yourself a mini Mr. Sparkles. I bought all of my gems when it was December 1st for me, but it wasn't December 1st in the States, and so I think I'm ineligible for it, and I think I've missed out on it again. I might submit a ticket to support and see if they can check my history, and maybe I'll get in. But yeah, so that stuff's been sent out. Mr. Sparkles, by the way, is a huge mini, like absolutely enormous. Congratulations to everyone who got one of those, and I'm totally not jealous of you. Lastly, last little thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, there was quite recently on the forums, one post of note, in which there was like a huge forum thread where people were talking about the PvE meta. Meta is something I usually think about with regard to PvP, which I've been playing a lot recently, but there is a PvE meta as well, and you know, this is largely Zerk stuff, right? There's very strong and sound reasons for why basically just run full Berserker stuff. You complete things way quicker, CC is basically useless, support is very, very limited, conditions are incredibly limited, there's a lot of variations and possibilities within Guild Wars 2, but none of it really works. People have just honed in on the best, and the best is so much better than all the rest. That's all you ever see ran. There was a very brief comment, but I think many people are excited about it, from a dev in this post that said, look, we are absolutely looking to change up the PvE meta, and you will hear something more on this next week. I know those are words that come out of their mouths all the time. You're going to hear more on this, you're going to hear more on this, and then it's like one more sentence we hear on it or something, or it doesn't clear anything up, but it is something to look out for. Apparently next week we'll hear their plans in terms of the PvE meta. I'd love to see a lot more variation there, because there's so many cool traits and things that just get no usage at all. You know, there's this whole thing where they're going for horizontal progression and adding more heal skills and more this and more this, more traits. I don't really need more, I just need the stuff that's already in the game to work viably, because that's just as good as adding more, except it doesn't, you know, add feature bloat or, you know, steepen the learning curve unnecessarily. I'd love them to focus on that first. Anyway, very last thing, again on the forums, there was like a questions and answers. Colin Johansson answered most of the questions, but there are some from some other devs, and it's quite lengthy. I sort of scanned through it. I'll give you guys the notable stuff. For example, the Chinese beta test is currently going on. They mentioned, again, there was a lot of like fluffy answers that came from the devs a lot. Like, one person had a legitimate question that was like, look, in Scarlett's backstory, you said that she just aced her way through all 3 of the Asuran colleges. Why did you do that? And I think that's a really good question. You know, it's kind of a cartoony way to do things. You know, they set up this incredibly intelligent species with these 3 prestigious, crazy colleges, and then they have a random character just come through and ace it and trivialize everything about it. You know, they had her spend more time on one, synergetics, I believe, and that was basically it. She said that was a little bit harder, and I enjoyed that about the story, but it was very, you know, cartoony and fairy tale-y and kind of lame. And this person asked this legit question. I was wondering what they thought about it, and the whole answer was, oh, this is all just going to be revealed in the next 4 patches, it's all super important, get hyped, blah blah blah. And it was kind of like completely dodging the question. I don't blame them for dodging the question, but and that's what many of the answers are sort of like. They mentioned the idea of world completion and where it should be, and in their current aims to integrate all 3 modes of Guild Wars 2, World vs World, PvE, PvP, in integrating them all together, they might consider making Edge of the Mists a part of world completion, which would be kind of a cool idea. You know, it's not going to be a big hassle for people to go there, which I think is what many people are immediately going to think. It's literally just wander around and grab a couple of waypoints, but it does encourage more PvEers to at least step foot in that region of the world. There was a question about people being disappointed with the World vs World Season 1 rewards, and they mentioned that they took a lot of look at feedback that they themselves obviously were playing World vs World, and that they were looking into doing something different for Season 2. And you can't say necessarily that means Season 2 are going to be better, but that does at least mean that the Season 2 World vs World rewards are probably going to be different. Someone asked about conditions being crappy in PvE, and they said that in the next few patches there could be some play with conditions where some creatures are actually much more weak to conditions than others. And along that line as well, there was another question, again talking about conditions, but it doesn't sound like the cap on the amount of conditions things can have is going to be raised or removed or whatever. They're just looking at other ways to make conditions more viable. Maybe that also ties into the PvE meta stuff that we might be hearing more about next week. But that's about it, guys. That's everything that I've got for the news. I know it's kind of rushed and boom, 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 boom. I could have, in theory, done a video about every single individual one of these, but I didn't, so I did it in this way. Keep an eye out for more regular stuff. As soon as I'm ranked 60 PvP, which will be happening in a couple of hours, I think, I've got some cool ideas for videos I want to do in the future, and it should pick up again. So thank you very much, guys. Hope you're having a great new year, and I will see you next time. Have a wonderful evening.